So today, for our inaugural episode, I'm fortunate and pleased to be joined by Naomi Boness, who I'd love for her to introduce herself, because I know she has a few different titles. Is that right, Naomi?
Yeah, I wear more than one hat for sure. So thank you, Ben. I'm so happy to be here today and talking about clean fuels. So I am the managing director of the Natural Gas Initiative at Stanford University, as well as the co-managing director of the Hydrogen Initiative at Stanford University. And then in my spare time, I sit on the board of a renewable fuels company called Aemetis, and I'm an advisor to a number of startups, many of which are in the hydrogen space. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Fantastic. Sounds like you got your hands full and into the thick of things. So how did you get involved in this space? Tell us a little bit about your background, how you started with your career and how you got into hydrogen and clean fuels.
Yeah, so I am a geophysicist by training. I got my PhD at Stanford, and I started my career working in an oil and gas company. Initially in exploration, so thinking about how to find oil and gas, and then moving into working on large LNG projects and strategy and planning and so on and so forth. And in about 2019, I think I just got old. I had a couple of kids and I really wanted to do something that they would find meaningful. And even my little kids at that time knew that we should be thinking about the environment, and decarbonization became increasingly important to me. And so I worked on a number of projects at Chevron, where I was at the time, and eventually decided that I wanted to follow my heart and come back to focusing on technology, and specifically technology for decarbonization purposes. And so I came back to Stanford to work with these amazing researchers. And a lot of my role is really trying to accelerate technologies from the lab out to the field. So I am a liaison, if you will, between technology developers and industrial operators, because we have such a short time frame in order to mitigate climate change. The clock is ticking. So this is really exciting work for me, and I feel like it's very impactful.
100%, 100%, and appreciate the overview. It's really interesting, right? Because you touched upon a lot of different things. Obviously Stanford's amazing institution. You guys are right on the cutting edge. But why clean fuels and why now? And I guess backing up a little bit, a good place to start really is, how would you define clean fuels? If you were talking to someone in the oil and gas space, has no exposure to hydrogen, no exposure to biofuels, how would you describe it to them?
So I think of clean fuels as fuels that have a lower greenhouse gas footprint than the existing fuels that we use today. And not just from the combustion of those fuels, but the whole life cycle from generation through to utilization. And when I think about clean fuels, I think about them in two categories. So one is biofuels, and that might be cellulosic ethanol or renewable diesel, synthetic fuels, sustainable aviation fuels. And then the second category is really around gaseous fuels, and that would be renewable natural gas and hydrogen. And I think what's really interesting about clean fuels is that they come from lots of different feedstocks, right? There's so many different pathways to make a clean fuel. It can be from agricultural and forest biomass. It can be from waste materials, from renewable electricity, and even from fossil fuels if you add carbon capture and sequestration.
Absolutely. I love that overview, and I love that you really touched upon the fact that it's almost like a wheel of all these different options, and kind of similar to how people talk about the rainbows or the different colors of hydrogen. There's so many different ways we could get from X feedstock to some form of biofuel, and we could go into that in a little bit more depth later. Why now? Why are the two of us sitting down and talking about clean fuels and hydrogen? what's going on in the world that's, facilitating these types of conversations in the market?
Well, I think the urgency around mitigating climate change has never been more real and forefront in the minds of both the national and international communities. I mean, just before we started this conversation, I was catching up on the news, right? And, climate events like Hurricane Ian really kind of bring home the reality of climate change. So we're all, I think, now rowing our boats in the same direction towards mitigating climate change. And, in the United States, I think we've really, just reached this inflection point. So to date, right, the clean fuels market was really driven by the low carbon fuel standard policy in California, which was a policy or is a policy, it's an existing policy that was designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. And the Inflation Reduction Act that just passed at a federal level has many new incentives for clean fuels, biofuels, hydrogen, specifically calls out sustainable aviation fuels, and it's not just around transportation. And so that opens up the possibilities for using clean fuels in hard to abate sectors to reach our decarbonization targets.
Absolutely, 100%. And I want to get onto that for sure, those different sectors and areas in the market that you talked about that, the clean fuels and hydrogen are going to work to decarbonize. But you touched upon an interesting point about policy and the IRA. I can imagine there's been loads of clean energy policies that have, popped up here and there, let's say over the past 5 to 10 years, one way or another. Why is it different now?
I think, there's been a number of state policies like LCFS, right, which have driven small scale markets. But we really haven't had a cohesive federal climate policy until now. And so the scale of this, it's really exciting. I think we're seeing participants from across all of the states. Everybody understands why this is important. We're all struggling with the impacts of climate change. And this bill, brings all the players together in a way that makes sense to really get the ball rolling here.
Absolutely. And, on that note, right, lots of different applications for clean fuels and hydrogen. As you said, you have hard to abate sectors. We want to pretty much decarbonize everything, right? What areas of your economy do you think are going to see the most benefit from clean fuels and hydrogen?
It's a great question, right? So, I do think that the IRA does have a strong focus on transportation. And so my hope is that will spur the use of biofuels and hydrogen in transportation across all of the states, not just California. I think that we will, that the hydrogen-specific incentives, right, are around the production of clean hydrogen, and they are not sector-specific. So this is really important because hydrogen has the potential to decarbonize so many different sectors. It's really ubiquitous, right? It's, anything that you could imagine using natural gas for, you could use hydrogen for. And so this bill and specifically the focus on hydrogen will enable so many different sectors like heavy industry, for example. So I think we're going to see interest from the steelmaker community and the cement making community in using hydrogen both in their industrial processes and also to produce cleaner power and heat that are necessary for those processes. Hydrogen is also, used for other applications. So transportation, because there are, it's so hard to decarbonize heavy duty transportation. I think that we'll see an uptake in the use of hydrogen and other biofuels for heavy duty trucks and ships and aviation and rail. And the biofuels, the credits have also been extended within the IRA, right? So the use of biofuels in things like sustainable aviation fuels will likely increase. And this is really important because for the aviation sector, there really isn't a lot of viable alternatives on the table. The use of pure hydrogen or batteries is really not technologically feasible for any larger aircraft, right? The kind that we all travel around on. So sustainable aviation fuels are really the decarbonization option on the table today. And it's really, important to incentivize these because they're essentially a drop-in for the jet fuel that we're using today. There's no retrofits needed of the aircraft, right? We can blend it in with the existing jet fuel, but without incentives, it's economically not feasible. So these types of incentives really sort of allow corporations to make good choices. I think the other application that I'll touch on is around the power sector. So with the increase in renewables, we're starting to see a lot of focus on energy storage. And this is important for a number of different reasons, right? So, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and we've got to figure out on a daily basis, how do we store energy? And by and large, we're doing a pretty good job using batteries for that. But when we start thinking about longer term storage, so the seasonal variations in output from solar and wind from summer to winter, battery technologies are really not a cost-effective solution. And right now in the States, we have something like 22 gigawatts of pumped hydro storage and another gigawatt of battery storage for seasonal storage. So that's what, 23 gigawatts total. If we were to move to a grid that was, say, 80% renewables, we would need something on the order of 120 gigawatts of storage in order to ensure reliability, right? The seasonal reliability. And, there's been lots of studies that show that battery costs would have to come down about 90%. And so using bulk chemicals to store energy, we've done for a long time, right? Right now, we rely on the vast reserves of natural gas. But I think what we'll start seeing is more and more utilities looking towards using hydrogen. And maybe it will be, hydrogen blended into natural gas initially, and then eventually transitioning to pure hydrogen that can be stored for long periods of time and then used when the solar and wind output is low.
Absolutely. And I love the overview you just gave. And it's clear, right? There's so many options we have in front of us. They all have their different benefits. Some are going to be maybe a little bit more effective at decarbonizing certain sectors than others. But, at a holistic level, is there one clean fuel to rule them all? is there one like
if I had the winning lottery ticket, I'd be on a yacht with Leonardo DiCaprio. No, there's no silver bullet, right? So I think that we shoot ourselves in the foot a little bit when we talk about the energy transition, because it's becoming more and more apparent that there is no single energy transition. There's going to be many, many small-scale regional transitions, and the resources available in any given location and the needs of that location with regard to their energy usage and consumption is going to dictate what the appropriate fuel choice is. I think, hydrogen has sort of been crafted as this energy superhero, right? That's going to save the day, right? We're all talking about it. And yes, we really need it. There is no decarbonization strategy that I've seen that doesn't have hydrogen within it. However, if we talk about it, and I know, we're thinking about the US here, so I'll keep my statistics to the US. The hydrogen's potential for decarbonization in the US is something on the order of 16%. of necessary reductions to meet any kind of reasonable climate goals. So we're going to end up with a patchwork of solutions. I think in different regions, we will see different types of biofuels, hydrogen, renewable natural gas being used depending on what's available as a resource.
Yeah. You know, it's I completely agree, right? And you know, I really like the way you put that, because I do feel like there is a tendency for, you know, it has to be all this or it has to be all that. You know, ultimately, I think it's going to require some more collaboration. It's going to be more of an energy mix, I think, than people realize. And you probably know better than anyone, right? And you just said it yourself. We need a little bit of everything. We can't put too much reliance on one way or another. And you know, there is a tendency probably for some of, you know, things like hydrogen to almost be, I don't want to call it a fad, but you know, it's the buzzword of the day, and maybe the next buzzword of the day, sustainable aviation fuels. You know, one thing I want to come on to is the challenges, right? So, you know, if you were playing devil's advocate, what would you say are the major roadblocks to all these endeavors we're talking about? What's gonna get in the way of all this progress we're trying to make?
So I think, you know, at a high level, right, we are struggling with how do we get infrastructure in place for things like hydrogen, right? There's not really, you know, we've got what, 10 million metric tons a year of hydrogen being produced, and we're talking about increasing that 5 to 10-fold. There's not really solid infrastructure in place to do that, right? So it's getting investments going. At the same time, we've got a lot of uncertainty about the markets and how hydrogen, for example, will be used. But that's true for all of these clean fuels, right? So, you know, I think the IRA package, for example, has some great incentives in it, but there is some clarity that is needed in order to drive this forward, right? Investors are not going to put billions of dollars on the line without being sure for, you know, how long these incentives are going to last and how the markets are going to grow, right? So I do see, you know, some issues there around the clarity of the regulations, and I know, you know, there's a lot of work going on right now by the DOE and others to establish that baseline. I think, you know, with regard to the markets, because everything's evolving, if we think about biofuels, right, you know, the transportation sector is also evolving. And so for road vehicles, you know, California just passed a mandate. So we're going to have all zero emission light duty vehicles by 2035. And so that market for biofuels is also kind of in flux as we sort of look to the evolution of the electric vehicle market. And so I think, you know, the stumbling blocks are going to be around getting the investments in place and establishing markets. And, you know, just to the point we were, you know, discussing a minute ago, I think that it's really important for those of us working on, say, let's say hydrogen, right? Not to like to all work together and not to only work on green from renewable electricity or blue from fossil fuels, because I think when we look to projections in 2050, everything is going to be necessary. And so it would behoove us, right, to join together as a clean fuels community to really move these markets forward. And, you know, there's enough market share for everybody. You know, that's not the concern. So I think, you know, driving coalitions is probably going to be super important in terms of actually getting infrastructure in place.
Yeah, and so if I understand you correctly, right, you know, we don't want to be just focused on green hydrogen. We want to focus on the entire rainbow, get as much of it out there as we can, increase the demand, drive down the costs, right? And then over time, we could perhaps start to narrow it down to a little bit more green than the more that we want, narrow it down to the colors that we do want. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Oh, so let me take a minute, Ben, to say I hate the color scheme. I hate it so much. It's I think it's really counterproductive. I think what we should be talking about is getting to low carbon intensity fuels, right? It doesn't matter really where they come from, right? We need low carbon intensity solutions. And that's really the metric that should be driving investment and driving policy decisions.
Absolutely. So, it almost sounds like what, if you were to be making a plea to the market is we need more open-mindedness, we need more flexibility, we need to consider perhaps, every option as opposed to just one. Because right now the way that we're going about things is perhaps focusing on too much on one thing or another, and also putting things into boxes and categories. We're almost kind of inadvertently discounting some things we should be talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I really believe that there is a role for all sources of low carbon fuels, right? So if we could, there another example would be renewable natural gas, which has, I mean, I think it's a no-brainer, right? If we have methane going into the atmosphere, we should absolutely capture it and use it. There's no excuse. There's no reason not to do that. And we've been really fortunate that the low carbon fuel standard credit in California has motivated a lot of action in that space, right? So, collecting it from dairies and from landfills. But I think we also need to be mindful of the scale, right? So even if we max out all of the potential renewable natural gas resources in the country, it's something on the order of 7 to 15% of our current natural gas consumption. So yes, we should do it. Yes, we absolutely should max it out, but it's not, going to be the silver bullet. Just like hydrogen and just like sustainable aviation fuels are also not going to do it by themselves. But when we create incentives that focus on low carbon intensity solutions, then as a cohesive, unified sort of approach, then we get to the targets that we're aiming for in terms of decarbonization.
Absolutely. And, you touched upon probably one of the most passionate parts of the clean fuels market that I really appreciate, especially if we're talking about waste energy, for instance. The US especially, and just humans in general we're extremely wasteful, right? And I'm honestly surprised that no one has thought of, 100 years ago, no one thought to take the waste that we're producing and do something productive with it. So it's one thing I find really, really cool is that we're taking landfill waste, we're taking animal waste, we're taking crop waste, all these different forms of biomass, and we're able to do something with it. I mean, now you have businesses that are essentially capturing carbon out of thin air and using it to produce fuels. So it's really fascinating everything they're able to do now. And, it just goes to show the innovation that's going on right now. I think, and what's the word I'm looking for?
Ingenuity.
Ingenuity. Thank you. Ingenuity.
That's a great word.
Yeah. I don't know why I couldn't get it out.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's all being spurred, right, by these very thoughtful policy incentives. I think, I would like to see the low carbon fuel standard, right, has driven almost all of the renewable natural gas operations to date, right? So, you get a very high credit price, particularly for dairy renewable natural gas, but also from landfills. You could imagine, and that gas has to be used for transportation. That's the catch there, right? There's so many applications for renewable natural gas, right? Utilizing it on site for heat and power, that should also be incentivized, right? We should be creating policies that really focus on maximum decarbonization, I think. And you know, for sure, transportation deserves a lot of focus, but you know, I think that there are other applications of these fuels as well that should also be incentivized.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I feel like we've covered a lot about this market. You know, we've talked about a ton, and you know, you've shared some really interesting facts that I know everyone are gonna eat right up and be interested in hearing more about. You know, if you're open to it, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your own passion projects, perhaps some projects you're working on at Stanford, you know, things that you come to work every day and are excited about, excited to keep advancing. You know, tell us a little bit about, you know, what's personal to you in this space.
Okay, so we've got another 5 hours, right, to talk about all my favorite projects. Okay, I'll keep it short. There's a lot. So I'm really excited about the work the Natural Gas Initiative and the Hydrogen Initiative are doing. So we, you know, are communities that are comprised of academics and industry partners and NGOs and government organizations. And I think that, you know, to my point about building coalitions, I think this is what it's going to take, right? We're in this evolving space where we need to bring communities together. It's, you know, it's really important that the existing kind of traditional energy sector be in communication with the new technologies that are being developed and these kind of policymakers, because all of that is going to be required to move these solutions forward, right? This isn't, you know, this isn't a small scale operation, right? We need all hands on deck, and that means everybody needs to be involved in the conversation. So I'm really passionate about bringing these communities together at Stanford. I think from a kind of project perspective, I'm really passionate about getting carbon dioxide carbon capture and storage projects up and running. Right now, globally, right, we got something like 40 megatons of CO2 being sequestered annually. If we're going to have any chance of meeting climate targets, that needs to be increased to something on the order of 3 gigatons. And this is really well aligned with, you know, the manufacturing of clean fuels, right? So I think that there's a lot of synergies there that provides kind of an economic incentive for scaling CO2 storage. So Aemetis is a company that I work with, and we're actively working on a CO2 storage project in California. We just need to get these projects in the ground, right? We need to, you know, just do it and prove that, you know, we can make a difference that way. I'm also really excited about some of the technology innovations that are happening in the hydrogen space, specifically around electrolyzer development. So I work with a company called Evolo that is manufacturing electrolyzers that don't have any precious metal components. And this is huge because as we think about the energy transition, it is not just CO2 that we need to have in mind, right? There is this whole suite of sustainability considerations, how we use our water, how we use precious metals, right? How we manufacture the plants that go with these clean fuels. And I think trying to think holistically about this space, I'm really passionate about understanding how we can be the best stewards of the green electrons that we have, right? When only 20% of our energy mix right now is from renewable energy, how we should use that output, that energy, I think should be a question that we're all asking ourselves. Should we electrify buildings? Should we charge our cars? Or should we make hydrogen for, right? And again, I think the answer to that question is going to be different depending on where in the country you live, what resources you have available, and what your needs are. But I think thinking holistically is really important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think, having a holistic view on everything is the way to go. One thing I wanted to ask you, I can imagine there's going to be lots of different people listening to this podcast from different backgrounds, different levels of their career. If anyone's listening to this podcast, perhaps they're going into college, they're looking at, deciding what to study. Perhaps they're maybe looking to go to Stanford, and study something climate or renewable energy related. What message would you have for someone that's, young, early in their career, or perhaps, haven't even, ventured into college yet, who wants to get involved in the renewable energy and clean tech space? What message would you have for them and how they could get involved and how they could make a difference and really, explore that career path?
So I think the first thing I'll say is that there are no bad ideas when it comes to decarbonization. That we need the bright minds of today and tomorrow to come up with new creative ways to solve this energy crisis. And I think that there are so many different aspects to this that finding something you're really passionate about is the most important thing, because all of these different pieces of the energy puzzle are important in our energy transition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Love that. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have anything else to add to the conversation. I feel like we covered a lot, Naomi. Just to reiterate for our listeners, this is slated to be a 4-part series. Who knows what will happen after those 4 episodes we have planned out. But we consider this to be a holistic overview of the market. Coming up on the next few episodes, we're going to talk about clean fuels and hydrogen applications for manufacturing and heavy industry. We're going to go into decarbonizing the grid and how clean fuels and hydrogen are going to play a role into that. And then we're going to discuss transportation, take a deep dive into sustainable aviation fuels and rail and trucking, and how these different fuels are going to play a role in decarbonizing that sector. Naomi, it has been a pleasure to have you on. And absolutely hope to chat with you soon.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, thank you.